All right, we're gonna get started here. First off, to all our new raiders and our existing raider, welcome to our first Ontario webinar. I'll just introduce myself again. I'm not met many of you guys. My name is Duncan Chow. I do handicap and horse trading in Ontario. Of course, I brought Bob Heath, who was horse trading since I was like 8 years old. So he's definitely seen a lot of courses. He's seen a lot of changes throughout the horse trading guide and horse trading process. And this one, the left hand horse trading initiative with us. Bob, I'm going to give you the platform and get started.
Thanks, Michael. Okay. Well, this is certainly something new to me. I've had the pleasure and privilege of doing a lot of the new raider training for about the last 10 or 12 years. I had a background in teaching. I was a physics teacher at one point, so the whole idea of mathematical modeling inherent in horse trading appeals to me. I sort of really enjoy doing these. The first time I've done a webinar, so it might be a little different for me. But we're all going to give it a try and see how it goes tonight. The format I'm going to use is going to be very similar to what I do in the new raider training sessions. The new raider training sessions take about a day in the classroom. So we're going to try and do that in 4 webinars. Now, that's going to be made possible because of several things that we've asked you to do. We've actually asked you to pre-read a section of the workbook. You're all familiar, I think, with the workbook that we created a few years ago. Try to keep it up to date. It's meant to be a self-learning device. It's not a textbook, not a reference book. It's kind of like if you're my vintage, you'll remember well Cole's Notes. The only reason I was ever got through Shakespeare was Cole's Notes. So it's kind of the Cole's Notes of horse trading, with some practice exercises in there to see if you are keeping up. So please try to do the readings of the sections beforehand. The second resource that we're going to use as well, probably not in this format. You probably have it in a PDF format that has to you, but basically it's more like a reference book that we use when we're rating. And may not be using it. Oops, you may not be using it that much in this tonight's webinar, but you certainly will be in some of the others. And then the third thing is goes back to my teaching days, is the learning objectives that we set out for you in advance. Tried to define what we're trying to achieve in terms of your learning in each of the webinars. So I tried to define them in performance-based terms. So you can sort of keep a checklist of those through the evening and learning them. Not sure what that is, Duncan.
Yeah, I think Peter or Robert, if you can turn off your mic in the bottom left-hand corner, that would be great. I think maybe just some frequency. So thank you.
Okay, so usually in these sessions I start by saying we all love golf. And one of the reasons we love golf is such a unique place in individual team sports, in that it's the only sport that I know of where you have a chance to have a fair competition against pretty much anybody in the world. And that's because of its handicap system. Excellent handicap system that relies on 2 things mainly. First being knowledgeable, honest golfers who know the rules, play by the rules, and submit accurate scores whenever they play. The second thing, though, is that they must be doing all of this on golf courses that are accurately rated. And that will be the substance of our forced webinars over the next little while. And that is, what do I mean by accurately rated? What's involved in the rating process that makes this possible? There's sort of 3 questions I always pose to people. The first one is, why do we rate? And the reason we rate is because all golf courses are different. They have their different lengths, their different complexities, they have different obstacles on them. And as I say in there, 80 around one golf course. Somebody else says they're an 80 shooter as well. You may have very different playing abilities. The only other handicapping system that I can think of is golf offers the same opportunity as bowling. So anyway, let's move on. And I want to start by having you look at this diagram. I'm going to be switching around back and forth tonight between different cameras. And you'll actually see me for a while, but you won't hear me. So I'm going to go onto a document camera. I have a lot of things that I want to work with on this document camera. And each time I go there, I'm going to have to kind of adjust the focus to maximize it so that I can see the maximum. So this is the famous, well, I don't know how famous it is, but this is a slope chart, a slope diagram that I drew years ago when I started doing this. Put the focus
Hey,
there.
Bob, can you hear me? Bob,
Yeah.
we can't hear a
Yeah.
thing. I don't know if it's because people are not on mute, but all we're hearing is scratching and a lot of reverb.
Yeah, I think it's because Robert, I think you have your mic on, and that's why you can't hear things. Is everyone else having any problem? Because I can hear pretty clearly as an attendee as well.
Hello, hello. Yeah, I'm having trouble as
Yeah, if you
well.
want, just yeah, if you just turn on your mic. Um,
Everybody should have their microphone off on their computer.
or if you want to talk a little bit closer to your computer,
Yeah.
that would
Okay,
also
but don't
help.
do that. It'll change my focal length here. Okay, is that any better?
That is
You
sounding
can't
better,
tell me
yes.
if your mic's okay. Let's assume that. Anyway, so years ago when I started doing this, it really surprised me how few people who should know what the term slope means really did know. I'm talking about golf professionals, people that I would run into as I went around the province doing course rating, really didn't have a good concept of what was meant by the term slope. So I tried to draw a diagram that I thought would help to demonstrate it to them. And this is the finished product. So usually there's too much on this diagram when I show this in the sessions that I do in the day-long programs. It's better to see how it's built. So I'm going to do that for you now. I'm going to go over to this document camera with a set of axes. And on these axes, I'm going to have this, down the left-hand side, I'm going to have something called your scoring record. And along the bottom, I'm going to have something called your handicap. And years ago, oh, somebody's going to get that. That's my phone. Years ago, up until mid 80s, we had a course rating system, but it was one number system. Many of you may have played golf under that system. And the course rating of the courses was a number around par somewhere to one decimal place and was generally viewed as the average score, the average of the best 10 of the most recent 20 scores submitted by a scratch player. Everybody kind of had a sense of what a scratch player was. And that would be sort of how each course would have determined its course rating up to that point. The USGA had a group called the Handicap Research Team, and they knew that the average number of strokes per handicap point was 1.13. That is a person who is a 10 handicap who generally shot his best 10 out of 20 would be 10 strokes above the course rating, would be generally 1.3 times each of those 10 strokes. So he 1.3 strokes above the course rating would be his average. So, but that was it. And there was nothing to account for any other golfer. So if you take a look at this graph, I can put a point, let's put a sample point on here, which represents a scratch golfer where he would be on that. Let's just say for this, just to put some numbers on it, let's say on this particular course that we're talking about, set of tees, the scratch golfer had an average, his best 10 of his most recent 20 would be 71.5. Okay. And that was fairly well known up until the mid 80s. The question would be, was there any way of predicting what the average best 10 out of 20 would be for any other player of any other handicap? That was the question. And that was just, it was decided by the USGA that they should put some time into doing this and see if they could develop a system was a gentleman named Dr. Dean Knuth, who was the executive director of the USGA. He also was a professor of statistics at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and he was the leader of their handicap research team. And they decided that the scratch player was fairly easy to define. And there's another player that they thought they could define that would help them understand this, and that would be the so-called bogey player. No question about the scratch player has a handicap of 0 just by definition. The bogey player, they said, well, this is going to be a person whose objective is to kind of bogey every hole. Sometimes he'll get lucky and par a hole. Sometimes he'll have a double bogey. But they said, let's, for the sake of argument, define this bogey player, and let's figure out how he plays this course. Now, he's going to have a higher score. So for the sake of argument, let me say the bogey player's best 10 out of 20. I'll go up from 20. I'll put a point right there. You can see that, I guess. And that would be, let's say that's just to pick a number, 95.2. So he plays, the bogey player plays 20 rounds hypothetically, and his average score is 95.2 of his 10 best. Knuth and his team were of the opinion that this was probably a linear relationship. So they attempted to join them with a straight line. And they decided they were going to call these things, give these things names. This point was called the scratch course rating. So if anybody asks you what the scratch course rating is, originally it started off as being the average of the best 10 of the most recent 20 scores on that course, on that set of tees produced by a scratch player. And then similarly, this would be called the bogey course. And those of you that can remember back from your elementary or your high school math, it's probably elementary school by now, realize that one of the unique characteristics of a straight line is it's the only geometric curve which has a constant slope no matter where you are on it. No matter which part of the line you use, the slope is the same. So they were did to calculate the slope. And the way you calculate the slope is you complete those two lines, and this distance then becomes the run of the line, and this becomes the rise. And you all remember from your grade 9 math that slope equals rise over run. So in our case here, we would have a rise from 71.5 to 95.2. What's that? That's something 0.7, 23.7, is that correct? I don't know, but that's close enough. And the run is 20. So that slope would be something like 23.7 over 20, which is 1 point something. And that sort of conforms with what the research committee said. They said that the average was 1.13 strokes per strokes on the scoring record per handicap stroke. This might be a little different because I just arbitrarily picked the numbers. But the interesting thing about it, though, is the units. Those of you that were physics students will know that every quantity has a unit. Well, not everyone, because this one doesn't. Because the units of rise here would be 23.7 strokes, and the units of handicap would be 20 strokes. So when you divide them, the units disappear. So I like playing with this graph a little bit to show you that it gives you some interesting possibilities. The possibilities are the following. If you are able to have this graph and to know what the scratch course rating is, what represents a handicap of 0 would score, and you know the bogey course rating, what a handicap of 20 would score, then that is all you really need then to know what anybody who plays your golf course, what their handicap should be from that set of tees. And there's two ways you can do that. Suppose you've got somebody who goes out and plays their 20 rounds and shoots an average score of 86. Well, you can locate 86 on that axis, and you can go across to this axis and down to this axis, And your graph has told you that that person's course handicap from that set of tees then will be about 11 point something. Let's just say 11.8. Okay. And the next thing it shows you, you could do the reverse. You could say, well, what scores do I have to average to be a 15 handicap from this set of tees? You could go up from 15 and across. That is less useful actually, but it's something you could also use this graph to do. I want to spend about 2 more minutes on this and then I'm going to go on. The next thing I want to do is say, okay, suppose on this same course you put in a set of back tees. What effect would it have on this line? And most people will realize that if you put in some back tees, then there's more yards to cover, and that the scratch player will cover this extra yardage in less strokes than the bogey player will. So he might go up about that much. It certainly will be higher. His scores will be higher because he's got more. But the bogey player's course rating will probably go up more. So you might then, for that set of tees, have something like this. Or you could even say, and they could put a forward set of tees in as well. And the reverse would be true. The forward set of tees takes fewer off the scratch because he saves more shots on that distance because he doesn't hit it as far. So this could represent your back tee, your middle tee, and your forward tee. And now this line that I put on here has an interesting thing, because that means you could now say, well, if I play the forward tees here, I'm probably, if I'm 11.8 handicap, I'm probably going to shoot something like an average of 81 or 2. I'll be back to my average of 86 if I'm playing the middle tees. And if I play in the back tees, in order to maintain that same handicap, I don't have to be as good. I'm the same golfer, but now I can shoot a 91, can be my average score. So I don't know whether I don't want to spend too much more time in this, but you can see potential for this, that in fact, having that line for any set of tees, having this line for any set of tees graphically means you've rated that set of tees. Okay, so here's where we make the quantum leap. Knuth's challenge and his committee was to try and determine these things, these scratch course ratings and these bogey course ratings, not from sending people out and seeing what they shoot, but from taking a look at the characteristics of the golf course itself. What challenges are there out on the golf course? And their first step and their most important step, I think, was this. They said, well, it's pretty clear that there are 2 components to your score. The one component is the number of strokes it basically takes you, given us a certain assignment, putts and chips and things like that, to cover the distance. So there's certainly a yardage component involved. The longer the yardage, the higher your score is expected to be. But there's also this issue of trouble, obstacles that you might get in along the way. And that would be exactly the same challenge for the bogey player. So Knuth and his team decided that we think that each of these 2 things, the bogey course rating and the scratch course rating, have 2 components. One component that's due to yardage. Now I've got a broken axis here because it goes all the way down to 0. And this would be called the scratch yardage rating. And a component that's strictly related to the number of strokes it takes you, or you lose, if you want to look at it that way, based on the obstacles on the course. And this is called the scratch obstacle stroke value. And it's not too much of a reach to realize the same thing occurs over here. There's a bogey yardage rating and a bogey obstacle stroke value. And the second thing that they decided, and it's been borne out by the statistics from the rating data they collect, is that this is usually a very small portion of the course rating. Of these 71.5 strokes, a very small percentage of these, it's on the graph that's printed there, usually 2 to 3% at most, is attributable to obstacles, because the scratch player doesn't get in obstacles as frequently He's not bothered by them. She's not bothered by them. And if they happen to them, they usually recover from it well. The bogey golfer is much more likely to get into obstacles and much more likely to be unsuccessful in recovering from them. Okay, so I'm going to leave that diagram there. So from here on, what the challenge will be is, okay, how can we then figure out what these two values, by the way, the word scratch is usually left off here, understood. When you talk about the course rating, and these are two things that you need to know to draw this graph, we usually just tell you the two things, the course rating and the slope. Because by doing that, if you remember your grade 9 math, once again, that's the point slope form of a straight line. You get the same. If you have 1 point on the straight line, you know it's slope. Then you will know everything you need to know about where that straight line is. Okay, so I want to move on now. That's the sort of the big picture thing, and talk a little bit about the length component of these. I don't know if this diagram I have on the I'm going to get out a little bit so you can see it better. It's familiar to you or not, but it is basically the diagram from the Golf Canada's current handicap manual. And it talks about the proper way for measuring the length of the hole. And there are basically three things that are involved. There's the green geometry, that is how the green relates to the line of play. There is the tee structure, that is how the tees are aligned in terms of tee decks and whatnot. And then, of course, there's the line of play. And so one of the biggest problems we have when we go out to rate is knowing whether we're dealing with the accurate yardages. And years ago, we would use scorecards yardages, and they just weren't very accurate. I don't know, their golf clubs were intentionally lying about the yardages, whether they were measuring them accurately or were measuring them very accurately just from the wrong places. But about 10 or 12 years ago, we started doing these by GPS, sending a team out to take a GPS measurement of the golf course. And now the yardages we have are very, very accurate. So I want to show you a little bit how that's done. I think the simplest one is on the right, where the hole plays straight away. And for rating purposes, and I use this term all the time, for rating purposes, the length of a hole is from the middle of its tee deck to the middle of the green. So when Duncan goes out to measure these things, he'll take a whole bunch of GPS readings, latitude and longitude at various places. He'll take one at the back of the tee deck and the front of the tee deck, and then the software will figure out where the middle is. Same thing at the green.
Yeah, Bob, now we trace the whole green.
Yep.
Get accurate.
Yeah, so very, very accurate. And we put a lot of faith in these, but this is the simplest situation where you have three unique, discrete tee decks, so it's the middle of each one. Sometimes you'll get into a situation where you have a shared tee deck. In this case, there's 3 tees on the deck. Yeah, I can point. Oh, sorry, I'm pointing here. Yeah, there's three tee decks on here, 3 tees on this tee deck. The USGA's position on this is you should apportion that portion of the shared deck to a particular tee based on the percentage of golfers who play that tee. That's virtually impossible for us to do. We have no way of knowing what percentage of players play the back tee, the middle tee, and the forward tee, share a tee deck. So we just divide it into thirds. That's all you can do. So if we say that's the case, then we say that the first third is reserved for the forward deck, the next third is reserved for the middle deck, and the back third for the back. So whatever the length of this tee deck is, and I'll show you some examples in a moment, this is 1/3 of the way back, this is another third of the way back, and this is another third of the way back, right? So this from here to here is going to be 1/6. From here to here is going to be 1/2, and then no, that's not right. Just a minute. You get what I'm getting at, though. You divide it into thirds, and then you measure from the middle of each one. The second thing that they want to show you here, though, is the effect of the hole that isn't straight away. And the playing length of this hole then is defined as being along the line of play. So this is the judgment call right here. where the elbow point is. And Duncan and the people who measure these, who use this GPS device to measure the courses, are really good at this. I'll show you how much difference it makes in a minute. It doesn't make that much difference, but they're really good at it. So the total length of this hole would be for the back tee, from the middle of the back third to this elbow point, and then from there to the middle. Whoops, again, I'm using the wrong one. From there to the middle of the green. And here's the most complicated example in the third hole, where you've got a single deck and a multiple deck. So this is a single deck from the middle. Here's the multiple deck. So this is quarter of the way back, 3/4 of the way back. You got 2 elbow points. So you'd be adding this distance plus this distance here, plus the distance back to whichever tee you played to get the length of the hole.
Yeah, Bob, like what we do is we take on the picture on the far right-hand side, we take 2 dogleg points so that it gets 2 points to accurately measure the playing length of that hole.
Yep, but this isn't necessarily how the hole's played by anybody, but it is the playing length that we use. So now I want to switch over to another source here to show you. I still want that camera. So let me get this out of here. I want to get off of here. I'm going to just minimize this, and I want to go to Google Earth Pro. This is the best thing that's ever happened to coursing in the last X number of years.
And I realized that a lot of people use for to calculate elevation as well.
Yeah, it's not that accurate for elevation. It's a good start for high elevations. We'll get to that in a minute. But I'm going to use Barrie Country Club for this for 2 reasons. Number one, we just rated this in the last part of August, so I'm fairly familiar with it. But the second reason is it's a terrific image. Not always the images are this good. This must have been a wonderful day. It's recent. It's very recent image, and it's a very clear image. And this happens to be their 8th hole. So let me tell you a little bit about the geography of this hole. So here's the green. It's a straightaway hole. They have 1, 2, 3, 4 tee decks. As it turns out, this is a single deck. You can tell. I'll show you their spreadsheet from the GPS measurement in a minute. That's a single deck. This is a double deck right here, and this is a double deck. They have 5 sets of tees. This deck is what most people play, so it gets beaten up. So I'm guessing that they have this little deck over here in order to let people play from there when they're doing maintenance on this. I never asked them, but I assume that's the case. It was tiny. So if you go to this deck, the length of this hole, you'd start measuring at the middle of the green. So that you put a mark on there, and I'm using the dimensioning tool on Google Earth Pro here. And I think you can probably use a straight line for this. If you use a straight line, you're sort of favoring the left side of the fairway a bit. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could move this to here, then go over to here. And if you did that, the length of the hole would be 332.5 yards. We round off to 333. So here's how little it affects the yardage. If you straighten this out, it's now 332.1, so half a yard difference. So that would be the measured length from that tee. Let me clear that. If you start off and go to the other tees, then this tee would be a quarter of the way back, because it's a double tee, so let me do that approximately there. It looks like it's about 402 yards. And now, since I'm on the same tee, I can just go back to here. And 415, I think that comports with the answer to the spreadsheet I got. And then you can go back to here, and the line of play is pretty good here. So maybe 434 from that tee, and then maybe something around 450, 449 from there. So that's a pretty straightforward one. If you wanted to take an example, I don't spend too much time on this, but the 10th hole is an interesting hole. There's a couple of tee decks up here, a double here, and a single here. So let's just do one of these. This is obviously a dog leg. You can't, let's get rid of that from the last time. You can't play the hole, even if you can hit it far enough, along that line. So there's no sense measuring it along that line. So what you would do is you would, Duncan and group that measured it would try to find an elbow point approach to measure this hole. The elbow point being the one that plays down sort of the middle of this part of the fairway, and then once you play the rest of the way, so that's not a bad one right there. So let me clear off for a moment and go back to here. So about 192 yards off the tee. That's going to be a layup for some people. We'll get to that a little later on in the webinars. But so let me clear that off. So, but it's a good measuring point. So from this tee, you'd measure there to there, and then to the green. So that's probably a pretty good example. We're a little close to the edge of the fairway here. We might move this maybe over there a bit. But about 311 yards would be their length from there. And then their second tee back would be a double here. So it's there, maybe 332, and then back here, maybe 340, and then there's a couple back here. Here, this is a practice putting green. It looks like a tee here, 387, 400 or so, 400. So that gives you an idea then of how this works when the measuring teams are measuring the length of the course, and I'll get back a little later on to what we do when we get there. Okay, what I'd like to do now is go back to what Knuth and his team decided to do about this challenge of trying to rate the golf course and come up with course ratings for the scratch player and the bogey player based on what was out there. So for this, I want to take a look at the course rating manual.
Hold on. Yep. So, Robert, Kapura, can you guys turn off your mics real quick? Some more people are having trouble here, so if you guys wouldn't mind just turning off the mics. That'll be great. Thank you.
So the first thing that, in order to be able to determine where those 2 points were on this table that we had previously, Knuth had to try and figure out how the scratch player and the bogey player would actually play the golf course. And to do that, they had to define hypothetical golfers. So we defined the two hypothetical golfers this way. The scratch golfer is a player who can play to a course handicap of 0 on any course. We knew that. And here's the key phrase here for rating purposes. This is really an important phrase. Use it all the time. Can hit tee shots an average of 250 yards and 210 for the women. All of the women's yardages that correspond to definitions for men are in brackets beside the men. So a scratch woman player hits at 210 off the tee, a scratch man player hits at 250, and then hits at 220 after that, and 190 after that, so that the scratch male player can hit a 470-yard hole in 2 shots at sea level. That's a critical number because those of you that have played golf long enough realize that that is the dividing line between what we call a par 4 for men and a par 5. So the par of a hole is determined by the scratch player's ability. A bogey player doesn't hit it as far. A bogey player has approximately a course handicap of 20 on a course of standard difficulty. I'll get to that later. Woman has a 24, and their distances are 200, and then another 170 up to 370 for the man, and 150 and 280 for the woman. So then you get this shot table here. Oops, here's the shot length table. This is really important. You just have to know this. While they were doing this, while Knuth was doing this and defining these shot lengths for the various golfers, the 4 golfers, I guess, he also said, well, it's not all carry. And they studied golf shots of different trajectories and whatnot. And they said of the 250 yards that the male scratch hits it, we're going to say it averages 230 yards of carry and 20 yards of roll on a normal fairway. A normal being a level fairway of average firmness. It would roll further if it was downhill, and it would roll further if the fairway was hard. But normal conditions, would be 15 to 25 yards of roll, which averages 20. And so that the second shot would be the same amount of carry, but now the 220 is achieved by a carry of 200 and a roll of 20. And there's the scratch players, male players distance for 2 shots. You don't often get 3 full shots on a hole. 690, I don't know if there's any holes over 690. The distances for the women are 210 on the tee shot, 190 on the second full shot, up to 400. You might get women playing a 590 hole, but I don't think so. The bogey golfers are a little different. The bogey male hits carries at 180, 20 yards a roll makes 200 on the tee shot. The next one carries at 150, 20 yards a roll makes it 170 for a total of 370. And then the bogey player will probably will run into some holes that are more than 540. So those holes will be 4-shot holes for the bogey player, full tee shot, full second shot, full third shot, and then what's left as his approach shot. The bogey woman player frequently has a 4-shot hole. She plays a lot of holes that are greater than 410. So she hits at 150, which is comprised of a tee shot of carry 130 and roll of 20, and then another 130 more, 110 and 20, up to 280, and then another 130 up to 410. Okay, so those are the yardages we're going to use as we map our way around the golf course. And I just want to make a quick point because we're running a little close on the time here. These are only average distances. When Knuth and his team were studying the shot lengths, they found that obviously there's a variety in shot lengths. And this table is called the accuracy table, and it attempts to describe this degree of accuracy that each of these players have. And I prefer to call this the scatter pattern, that if a scratch player hit a large number of drives, say 1,000 drives, then 2/3 of those 1,000 drives could be expected to be within an area which is an oval in shape that has a width of 41 yards and a depth of 21. In other words, those shots would be somewhere between 20.5 yards to the left of center and 20.5 yards to the right of center, and they will be somewhere between a maximum of 10.5 yards past 250 when he really hits one, or 10.5 yards below 250 down around 239.5. So within that accuracy range would be where you would expect to find 2/3 of the drives. The other third of the drives will be outside of that. This is a fairly common standard statistical pattern. It's a Gaussian distribution, or a bell curve, as they say, and every reason to believe that it applies to these golf shots. You'll notice that as a scratch player shot, these are the shots they're attempting to hit. You notice that as they get shorter, it gets much more accurate. Okay, so an 80-yard shot, 2/3 of them are within 5 yards to the left, 5 yards to the right, and between short 73 yards up to 87 yards. For the bogey, for the scratch woman, of course, we don't have anything here. She can't hit that far, but her values for her tee shots are 34 and 20. So it's rather interesting, isn't it? The bogey woman player is much more accurate with the driver than the man, but her distance control isn't as good. That she has a much more, well, she's not trying to control the distance anyway here, but she'll hit the odd one up to 14 yards past the average and still be within that bell curve distribution. And once again, she also gets much more accurate. She hits 40-yard shots as accurate as the scratch man does, but depth control is about the same as the scratch man, between the 40 and the 70. And you can do the same for the bogey golfer. You can see the bogey man is much wilder with the driver. Well, no, I mean, excuse me, more accurate with the driver, much greater variation in distance. Can hit it all, a long way sometimes. And the bogey woman is pretty consistently, they both go down at about the same rate. The reason we mention this accuracy table is that that means that those distances they showed you on the previous page of the average distance that Scratch can go into is only an average, and it's possible from time to time for the Scratch player, or any player for that matter, to reach a hole that statistically they shouldn't be able to reach. Every so often they'll hit one of these ones that's in the 251 to 260 range, and follow it by a second shot that's in the 220 to 230 range, and end up as much as 490 yards from the tee. And we'll get into that a lot later, but this is called the transition zone. There's one other thing I wanted to show you here just quickly, and I'm going to go on to the camera here. And that is, if you draw these, if you take this table and you draw it in 2 dimensions, you can see the Scratch players are the dark ovals, and the bogey players are the light ovals. You can see what happens as the Scratch player starts to hit shorter and shorter shots. There's his 250. So there's the ones that go up at 260, and there's the ones that only get out 240. And here's the ones that are, I can show you the scale on the bottom. I'll move it up. I can't, scale on the bottom is a little hard to see on here. Here we are. Yeah, sorry, you can see here, you can see that here is the 20 yards, 21 is just beyond that to the left, and here's the 20 yards to the right over here. So just another visual that shows you this probably makes it a little easier for you to understand why I call it a scatter pattern. So this is the way that Knuth and his research team said, what we're going to do is we're going to send the golfers, the 2 golfers for men or the 2 for women, around the golf course hitting shots of this length along the line of play. For rating purposes, we're going to assume they go along the line of play, and we're going to see how they play the golf course, where they end up. And if that's the case, then they will end up having a series of landing zones, fairway landing zones. And these fairway landing zones are in predictable locations on straightaway holes. For example, if this is the tee and this is the green, and this is tee, this is the green, and then on this particular hole, this area right here would be a landing zone, because it's the one that goes from 180 to 200 if a woman is playing, or man is playing, sorry, or from 130 to 150 if it's the bogey woman. So this is basically bogey first FLZ, I would call it. That's the bogey golfer's first fairway landing zone. And this one up here then would be the Scratch golfer's first fairway landing zone. And on this hole, just if the thing's to scale, the bogey player might have a second landing zone, might not be able to get there. If this is 200, then the second shot's a little shorter, might be close to getting there. Scratch player will certainly get there too. Of interest here is Knuth's theory here was that we'll say that this is where the bogey player is, and then when the bogey player gets there, this is where we have to take a look at what obstacles there are there that might be a problem. And where we'll look is an area that's defined as being near the landing zone. This is the landing zone right here from, oops, sorry, I keep putting my pencil in the wrong thing. From the side of the fairway where it meets the rough, in this case a bunker, over it meets the rough here, and from the place where the ball lands to the base where the ball stops rolling under normal circumstances. But there's a whole bunch of other area here that's called near the landing zone. And that's the area that we're going to investigate and say any obstacles that are found in that area are likely to have an impact over a large number of rounds on this bogey scoring. So, and that area is 20 yards. I don't know if you can see it clearly enough, but it's in 20 yards before and after the landing zone, and within 20 yards to each side of it is the sort of area that's near. So let me just minimize this and go back to Google Earth Pro. Oops, let me get rid of this. Got to get that off of there. No, I want to get, where's my Google Earth Pro? There it is here. Okay, so let me clear where we were now, and let's go back to that 8th hole that we were at before, and let's say, okay, what you now should be able to do at this stage of the game is map out how the 4 players will play this hole. That would be something that it's a sort of starting point. So let's pick the shortest tee first. So let's assume that this is a scratch player playing from this tee, a scratch male. But we'll take all 4 players from this tee. We can do them from the other tees too. Remember, the tee was in the middle. So this scratch player hits his tee shot down here. And if you look up in the right-hand corner, you'll see the dimensioning box. So there's 230 right there. That's where the scratch male's drive is going to land at 230. It's going to go until it gets to 250. So that's where the scratch is going to end up after one shot. And now you can take a look at that fairway landing zone that we talked about. It's from there, 20 yards back, usually. I'll talk about that next week. So this is the area that's near the landing zone, and we can see that as course raters, we now know there's no sense worrying about anything back here. He's not going to be there. He's going to be here. So we might take a look at this bush here and say, well, that's probably going to be defined as a penalty area now, but there's not a lot of trouble there, but we will evaluate it. And then to know what's left, he would then, after hitting that 250-yard tee shot, be expected to hit a 82 yard, excuse me, shot. Okay. So far, there's only 2 types of shots that people hit: full tee shots, full second shots, possibly full third shots, but full fairway shots until they get within reach, and then they hit an approach shot. So let's take that one away, and let's take a look at how this differs from the bogey male plays the hole. The bogey player hits it out as well, and he lands at 180, which is about there. I'm not going to mess around trying to get right on 180. And he starts to roll, and he rolls up to 200. So you see, he's faced by a whole different set of circumstances playing this hole. He's not up here near the penalty area so much. It's pretty wide on where he is. He's got this bunker here that we'll have to take into account at some point, but pretty much wide open there. And that's at the 200-yard mark. He's got to get to the same green. So we'll see if he can do it. First of all, yeah, it's only another 132 yards, which is well within his capabilities. So this is a 2-shot hole for him, a full tee shot of 200 yards, followed by a 132-yard shot to the green. So that takes care of him. Let's go back and check out the scratch lady. Now she flies at 190, so let's find where 190, well, I have a pretty good idea where 190 is going to be, and you know why, I think. So there's where she lands it, and now under normal circumstances, she'll roll it to 210. So she doesn't encounter very much different circumstances than the bogey male player does. And as a matter of fact, the fairway landing zones for the scratch woman and the bogey a male probably overlap by 10 yards. One's from 180 to 200 off the tee, the other's from 190 to 210. And then her next shot will be, let's say 320, so about 110 yards into the green there. I hope you don't, it's a little repetitive, but I want to show you all 4 just so you can see what would be required to take in consideration from this tee. So here's the bogey lady. She flies at 130. That's already too far. Right behind the A, I think. No, just there, right there. There's where she's going to land, right around there. And a little tight there. The trees are getting a little close to the edge of the fairway. Then she rolls it up to 150, and it starts to open up a little bit. Now the question is, can she get there or not? So let's say she hits a shot. If she hits her second shot 130, then the eventual end point for her I'm looking at is going to be 280. That's where she goes in 2 shots, and there it is. She goes to 280 by going to 260 in the air and then rolling up to 280. right about there. And so it's a 3-shot hole for her, but that's why she's a bogey golfer. It's a 3-shot hole for her. Everybody else played it in 2, and then she's got maybe 50 yards left. And so we should be able to do this for every hole on the golf course. Well, we should be able to, we do have to do this sort of for every hole on the golf course and from every tee, if we want to have a rating for each tee. But we don't really have to do that. What we have to do is make use of the fact that a lot of the fairway landing zones can be close together, and therefore we can use the same measurements for some of them that we use for the others. So let me next go then and finish up by taking a look at the last thing we were going to do, I think, was to take a look at the rating process itself. So let me get rid of this. I can't, it's behind my ruler now. There we go. Back over to here. Thanks, Duncan. I told you that the rating, the measuring team goes out and measures the golf course for us and produces a spreadsheet. And once again, I'm going to use the Barrie golf course as my example here, simply because I have it. And it was a good example. So there are the 5 tees we talked about. Here was the 8th hole that we were talking about. Sorry, here was the 8th hole that we were talking about here. And those yardages are just correct. Well, you won't know because we just went with the first one, but the others were correct when we looked at them. So the information on here is rather interesting. The first piece of information that the team gives is the length of the tee deck. So this is a tee deck that's 10 yards long. Whoops, 8th hole. 25 yards long. Often we get an S in there. I don't know why this one doesn't, but that would mean 25 and it's shared. And therefore, if it's shared and it's 25 long, we will know that if there's 2 sharing it, then one's at a quarter of the way back, one's at 3/4 of the way back. And you can see all of the other tee decks then are defined by the length of the tee deck and the yardage at the appropriate point. These things can never be current. I don't know when the original GPS rating was done, measurement was done for Barrie, but it was a while ago, and they had two objectives going on with their golf committee. They were trying to stretch the back tees out, make it longer. They thought they had 7,000 yards anyway, but they didn't. I'll show you their scorecard. They printed their scorecard as if they had 7,004 yard black tees, but they really don't have that. They weren't measuring.
I get a question of why are you making my golf course shorter?
Yeah, and I usually tell them, go look at Google Earth Pro.
Well, I tell them I don't go to your course measuring trying to make your course shorter.
No, that's true. But that's one of the first things that happens is the golf course. The first time we use the GPS measurements on a golf course, they usually lose a significant amount of yardage. So in an effort to gain some of that, they put a new back tee in on 14. You can see here, the back tee used to be 424. They moved it back 20 yards. This is all done very accurately. And then they used the one that was there for the back tee. They made that the next tee up, 424, and then they left all the others. So these are things that happened between when the spreadsheet was produced or when the actual yardages were measured and when we got to the golf course to do the rating. And they did the same on 18. They put a back tee in at 505 and another, and also it was a shared tee. So we got a 505 and a 485 out of that back tee. And they just forgot about the one that was 452. And so they got some new yardages out of this, a little more to their liking, but still didn't crack the 7,000 yard mark. And then the second thing is they found that the yellow tees, the forward tees, were being played by ladies mostly, and over the years a lot more super senior men, and they were having trouble making carries over obstacles, so they moved up a bunch of them. They moved 4 tees up. to create shorter tees. So the last thing I want to show you then is today, given these images, and that we know how far each of these 4 players whose trip around the golf course we have to map. Yeah, I got to get zoom. Where I lost my where's my? I lost the focusing part.
Here, you focus here.
I can do it over here.
Oh, here.
There we go. Move me back a bit. No, the other way. I want to see a lot more. Okay. So we're going to collect an awful lot of data as we go around the golf. I'm looking for the other one. I need here's the form one, the one I want. You have to keep track of all of this stuff. So we have the official record of a rating is on a thing called the USGA Form 1. And you have to have one of these that theoretically for every tee that you're rating for both genders. So it creates a lot of paper. So on the front hole, for example, this is the front 9, and then the back page would be the back 9. Yeah, okay, you can mess with the size of it so they can see. So you have some sort of generic hole data here, what the par is, what the length is, what the green size is, and none of that changes. And then you have 2 columns, one for data related to the scratch player who's playing that hole. And we know this is going to be to separate these 2 because we've already seen that their landing zones and the obstacles they're going to meet along the way are in different places. And the one on the right is for the bogey player. And so as you go around the golf course and you're taking measurements, you notice that the columns here are by hole, but the rows have 2 different sort of ways of being depicted. In one case, it is boldface printing on a dark background. Yeah, one is boldface printing on a dark background, and the other it's just normal printing on a light. The dark background will represent actual rating values that will be entered into the USGA course rating database in order to generate the rating. The software will generate that rating. And the other information is for recording data. Okay. Now let me go back to this again. So the last thing I want to talk about is then this looks like a lot of work. It can be a lot of work. However, the USGA has given us some rules to go by in terms of which tees need to be rated, which holes on a given tee need to be rated. So if you look, I'll just do one hole for you here. It says that for men, we don't rate any tees that are over 7,000 yards. We'll produce a rating for them, but we don't need to actually rate the holes. We get the rate by taking the data from the next tee down. It's called replicating. In this case, it would be blue. We use the black yardages for sure, but all of the landing zone data, since the landing zones are probably fairly close, we just use the blue landing zone data. In this case, the yardage for the black tee is 6,800. So we got to do this black tee for men. Okay, I'm putting a man there. The 6614, we got to do that tee for men. The 6213, we got to do this tee for men and this tee for men. And so we got all 5 tees for men. For women, the 7,000 barrier that we use for men is 6,000 for women. So we don't need to actually rate tees that are over 6,000. We will give them a rating up to 6,300. So we will give them a rating for women by replication here. I'll tell you what that means later. But we won't actually rate the tees at 5,700 for women, and we will rate them at 5,199 for women. So there's the sets of tees. So we got to actually do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 men's ratings and 2 women's ratings, and then we have to generate a woman's rating for the blue tees here that are between 6,000 and 6,300. The last thing, so that tells us which tee sets we have to rate. Within that, we don't have to provide individual ratings for any holes that are within 25 yards of each other. The theory being that their landing zone we mapped out earlier start to overlap significantly when the distances are that short between the tees, and therefore we don't have to do them separately. We can use the data from one of them for the other, and that's also called replicating. So for the last thing tonight, I'm going to take a look at the first hole. So what do we have to do to rate the first hole? Well, we've got a triple shared tee on the first hole. You can tell because it's this shared tee up here is sort of a funny shared tee. It doesn't show as a triple shared tee but it's just two tees and it has a kind of a little tier on it. One tee's on the back. So these three are all within 25 of each other. This is 10 white, 10 less than blue, which is 14 less than black. So what we would do here is we would rate the blue tee, and we'd replicate the black one with the blue data, and we'd replicate the white one with the blue data. And by doing that, we wouldn't be making too much of an error. Now, the little caveat they put on top of this is you should probably rate all of the holes on the tee that's more frequently used by most of the players. I've talked to the Barrie people, and I said, which of the two tees here, blue or white, are more frequently used? And they came up with a very clever answer. They said, well, not really either of them. What's frequently used is a hybrid set that we have right between them. So this gives me the latitude then to choose to rate the 438-yard hole and to use its values for the 452 and the 428. So for men, we would do the blue, we would do the 382 because it's not 25 yards of another one, and we would do the yellow. And so on this hole, number one hole, we would actually be rating 5 holes. We'd be rating blue for men, red for men and women, and yellow for red and women. So that's a lot less work than the 7, 8 ratings that we're going to produce.
Yeah, I think the last thing I want to add to that is once we determine our primary tees, you can just play thing, go and cross off anything that's replicated within 25 yards.
Mm-hmm. So it cuts the work down quite a bit.
Yes.
I think that's all I wanted. Oh, I just wanted, one of the learning objectives at the end would say, okay, so if we're going to replicate, if we're going to replicate one of these tee sets onto the other, what does that mean? What that means is the blue, we're going to measure that. So all of the data for the blue is stuff we measured. It's legit. Okay, we just write that on the blues form 1. If you go to the black form 1, we'll put in the black yardage, the green sizes, all that stuff the same. But we will use the landing zone data that we collect from the blue for the black tee. The only caveat I have about that, and it doesn't apply in this case, is because they're only 14 yards apart, but when they get up to be 23, 24, and 25 yards apart, you might be stretching the overlap a little bit. So if there are any, I got to be careful I don't get ahead of myself here. If there are any factors that are effective playing length factors that are way different from the black tee than the blue tee, or if there are any things that have to be carried, obstacles have to be carried, you can just barely carry them from 438. You might not be able to carry them from 452. So replicating from blue up to black might not be valid. That person playing the black tee, even though it's only 14 yards different, might have to play it totally differently than the blue person. So you just have to be a little aware of that when you get heavily into the replication. So I think that's all I wanted to do for tonight. If any questions came up, I'm sitting in my dining room here, so I'm not going anywhere. I can
so
answer any
this is
questions.
the conclusion of our first webinar. So now we can just open up to questions for existing raters and new raters. If you have any questions, we're going to be here to answer them. But if you guys don't have any questions, I'll be sending my next email early next week to you guys for our second webinar. And yeah, thank you guys for joining us this first evening. I hope you guys had a lot to take away. And yeah.
I just like to apologize for the awkwardness of this. The flipping things around from the document camera to the computer is a little different when you're doing it in this kind of a setting, so probably be better at it next time. But anyway, did anybody use the chat boxes or anything?
No,
Any
we
questions?
didn't have any questions from the chat box, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, if any, again, we'll stay around for the next 5 minutes, and if anyone have anything about maybe a course they rated this year, or maybe a course play that they have questions about, now would be a good time to ask either in the chat box or turn on their mics and ask the question. So thank you guys so much, and yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks in early November.
Yeah, from the next two, the next are going to be more kind of sort of concrete than this one. This was sort of the whole conceptual idea of trying to develop a mathematical model to predict how 4 golfers are going to play a given golf course. But once you get into the next sections of effective playing length factors and obstacle measuring, it becomes a lot more concrete.
Duncan, it's Rick Randall.
Good night.
Just can you just give me those 2 dates for the sessions?
Yeah.
Every second week, isn't it?
Yeah, I can give you the dates real quick. But I'll send everyone, the existing raters and new raters, that email. But the next dates, let me just pull it up real quick.
I lost my stuff over here.
I'll give it back to you. Hold on. Just bear with me. I'm just gonna pull that up.
I got them written in my book if you need them.
Yeah, it's just in my email somewhere.
Next one is November
November 7th, November 21st, and then December 5th.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Brennan. Brennan said he did a good
Welcome.
session.
I wasn't real happy with it. Just not.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Robert.
Hi, and thanks for that presentation. It's really quite interesting. It took me about half the presentation to figure out how to turn off the microphone, so I'm a bit of a novice here. But that chart you have on the Barrie Golf Course, the first hole?
Yes.
Yeah, the last one you covered. Is it the yardages that you've assembled the 3 holes because they're only X number of yards apart, or is it the tee deck length?
It's just the artist that you could conceivably replicate holes that are on different tee decks. It's a funny thing you should mention because most of the holes that you replicate are on shared decks just by the very nature of the fact that the deck is shared. They're going to be close together, but they don't need to be. It looks like the tee deck on number 1 there's 2 tee decks. One is 10 and one is 19. And it looks like the first one's on the deck than the other 2. But in fact, if you looked at the GPS, or the Google Earth Pro shot of the first hole, you would see that from above it's like one big tee deck. The only reason that it might look like 2 is the back 10 yards of that 29-yard deck is about 1.5 feet higher up, like a tiered green. So yeah, that we would they're replicable for sure, those 3. And then there's the 382 on the 19 hole, the 19 deck, that's all by itself. So the 382 is at the middle of that 19-yard deck, and then the 348 is all by itself, and it's at the middle of the 15-yard tee deck.
Or you can look at the last column. 436, 411. Those are 2 different tee decks, but they're within. Right at 25 yards, so those could be replicated. But
which hole are you on?
Right here, the last one. If you point to the last one here.
Which one? What number? Oh,
the 7.
Oh,
yeah, this one. Yeah, 436 and 15.
Hole number 15 there. We haven't got there you go. Hole number 15. There's 436 on a separate deck by itself. See, I would be somewhat loath to replicate
Yeah,
those,
we'll
even
take a
though
look
you're
at it.
allowed to. I know that hole, that 25 yards means that I would only rep like the players are going to be able to play them the same way, along the same line of play, with no obstacles that they have to carry. Because you might carry that the guy that the player can carry from 411, but the person having to play from 46, whether it's the scratch or the bogey player, just might not be able to carry that up. So might have to lay up behind it, which changes everything. That might change it into a 3-shot hole where previously it would have been a 2-shot hole for a scratch or something. So anyway,
Okay, thank you. That was great.
yeah, okay.
You still kill people.